Hi everyone, Haley here with Menlo Coaching. I want to chat a bit of critical reasoning. Critical reasoning is super core to the test maker's mission because at its core, the GMAT is all about reasoning critically. And that's exactly our task here. And that means that success on critical reasoning will often translate really nicely into success elsewhere on the GMAT, not just in verbal, in quant as well. But that success is going to come from ensuring that we're reading carefully to answer the proper question, to address the argument as it's been presented to us, and to ensure we aren't letting any of our personal biases sneak in along the way. Let's take a look at two pretty stellar examples that express what I mean by that. Now, in this first example, we're asked what most logically completes the argument, which means we're going to need to use a little context to know what our job is. And this word because before the blank indicates that we're looking for something that, if true, adds to the validity of our argument, strengthens the conclusion that the new machine will allow corn growers to double their profits per acre. And that means that I should have a couple of answer options that are pretty immediately pretty suspicious. Saying that the plants will need to grow taller or will require more fertilizer or that we're going to leave some fields entirely unplanted definitely aren't going to be helpful to us. So pretty immediately, we're down to A versus D. But the distinction from there becomes a little trickier because there's a decent chance that when you read through this argument originally, you went, wait a second, if I can plant the plants closer together, can't I put more of them in a particular space? And if that led you to gravitate toward answer option D, we want to be really cautious here for a couple of reasons. One, we're told the number of plants grown per acre will almost double. So all other things being equal, can almost doubling the number of plants grown per acre double my profits if they're producing lower yields? Absolutely not. In fact, this tells us all other things being equal, that definitively isn't going to happen. And on top of that, didn't answer option D kind of just reiterate something that we already knew was true? That will never, ever, ever be our job on a strengthen question. We're never being tasked to just reiterate something that we already knew was fact, and that certainly can't add to the validity of the argument. Now, our correct answer was a little more subtle, but I want to draw attention to this word profits. Because anytime I have anything even remotely data-driven in my critical reasoning, whether it's the potential difference between the average and the usual or expected case, or, as we saw here, the fact that they could have asked me about sales, they could have asked me about yield, but they didn't. They asked me about profits. Well, there are many ways that I can increase profits, one of them being by decreasing the costs. And that's exactly what answer option A presented us with, despite the fact that it may not have been the first thing that you would have looked out for on your own. So again, when we're dealing with critical reasoning questions where there could be many ways to strengthen or to weaken a particular argument, we need to lean on process of elimination, look out for bias, and ensure that we're looking out for the precision in language along the way as well. Let's take a look at one more example. Now, in this next example, our task is the opposite. We're looking to weaken the editorial's argument, to weaken the idea that it would protect not only steel companies, but also industrial employment, to take measures to reduce cheap steel imports. Why? Well, because these steel makers are losing their sales. Do you see anything interesting about the difference in language between our evidence and our conclusion? The evidence talks all about the trials and tribulations of these steel makers, but the conclusion is addressing industrial employment as a whole. Those aren't necessarily the same thing. Industrial employment encompasses far more than just people who make steel. So what if the rest of industrial employment could be really helped by this cheap steel? That's exactly what our correct answer option C, addresses. So this question becomes an abundantly easy question to tackle if we saw that subtle shift in language. But it's a really tricky one for a lot of students if they don't, because they'll find themselves reading through the argument and having a hard time finding what's problematic about it. So again, on critical reasoning, very often, the challenge associated with the question deals with how well we're breaking down elements of precision in language, identifying what the question's truly asking us to answer, and sifting through convincing wrong answers by avoiding our personal biases along the way.